Recently, I made a video called I Am a Bad DM. And in that video, I talk about a lot of stuff I want to improve as a DM. One of those things in the video was descriptions. And I think I was wrong about what I'm bad at. So, in I Am a Bad DM, if you haven't watched it, I would recommend you go and watch it before we continue on with this video. I say that I have a lot of problems with the descriptions because my descriptions are purely functional. Like you walk into a bar, you fight a goblin, the soldier stabs you, like purely functional descriptions. And that I needed to add more pizzazz to it. And I think a lot of my problem with descriptions in D&D stems from watching a lot of actual plays where the DMs are very descriptive. And I realized that there has to be a balance here. There are some scenes that maybe should be more descriptive. I'm going to describe one that I worked on before this video. And then there are scenes that maybe functionality is the most important thing. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about things that I learned for this video. So first, I watched a few YouTube videos that all focused on the same thing, which is don't over describe. So you can say a bunch of fancy things about a room. You can talk about what kind of wood the floor is made out of, what shape and style the chairs are, stuff like that. But does it matter to what the players are doing? Because there is an issue, and I can recognize this as a player, where if you over describe something, the players are going to put more importance on that thing. So if you over describe a chair, like I was just talking about, maybe the players think something important is happening with that chair. So it is important to describe the most important parts of the scene. And that is reflected in the player's handbook. I just went out of frame with this. Dungeon Master's Guide, not the player's handbook. It is reflected in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5.5 on page 26 talks a decent amount about narration, which is pretty much what I'm talking about with descriptions. So the first thing for narration is to lead by example. You want to be enthusiastic. You want to add energy, draw players into the world that you're building. And you want the players to describe their characters' actions, incorporate their narrations into your accounts. So pretty much you want the players to describe scenes. And I love when players do this. I know some people aren't as comfortable with it, but I do love when a player describes what they mean when they do an attack, like what it looks like. I've had players that describe the flair that the characters bring to different spells and stuff, and that's one of my favorite things. Now, more importantly, the next thing on here is brevity. So keep your descriptions short and evocative is the first sentence of that. You want to focus on the important information like I was just talking about. The players need to know about significant features their characters can perceive. So things like what's in the room, are there monsters? If you're entering a hotel room and you're investigating it for something, is there like a wardrobe, a dresser, a bed? You don't have to go into big detail with that, but you do need to tell them what's in the room. And an important part of this is you want to allow time for the players to ask follow-up questions, which should help you describe the room using things that they are already interested in. And then you want to talk about the atmosphere. You can add touches of atmosphere. Maybe there's a smell of ash, tiny beetles skittering across the dungeon floor, stuff like that. So you want to pick a couple of senses, so like sight, hearing, smell, touch, or taste to highlight. And you want to use this to direct a player's attention. So let's say you're in a hallway. What I would do now that I've read this, because like I said in the first video that started this series, I'm learning how to be a better DM. This is not me giving advice on how to be a DM. This is just us learning together. So I'm kind of talking as I go. This video is not scripted like a lot of my other videos are. But like if I'm in a hallway and there's a bunch of different options for doors, if the players want to investigate to see which direction they should go, maybe one of the players rolls a perception check and they smell a waft of rot underneath the door. Something is decaying behind one of the doors, and that could give them the information they need to pick a room. This has the example of a bard flying onto a gravestone to draw the character's attention to that gravestone. And I think that's a really good point here, especially if your players are having issues figuring out what to do next. I think stuff like that could really help drive the story forward. And I really like that advice here. Now, this leads into drawing the player's attention. So good narration invites the players to examine details of the environment that lead to encounters or important information. So you want to give them enough to just invite further explanation, but don't create the equivalent of a flashing neon sign. So you want to distinguish options. So this is like a good analogy with Robert Frost thing. So there's a path less traveled. Maybe you have two paths. One of them is a beautiful forest path with a cobblestone road. And the other one is dirt. There's tree roots growing into the dirt. There's dead trees, decaying plants. You can smell decaying animals. That helps your player decide which one to go down. Now, if they're looking for something that could be causing decay, they would go down the more dangerous sounding path because they are adventurers. This is not like the Robert Frost book or poem, the Robert Frost poem. Another thing here is not to limit options. So let the players use the information they've gathered to make the decision that they want to do. It can be helpful to offer suggestions, which I like because I do this a lot. Like you can go through the door, search the chest, or look down the shaft. Just make sure to finish that off by saying, or anything else you can think of, which is something that I could do better at. So this is something that I'm going to be taking into account in future sessions. And then it says, do not assume actions on the character's part. So if they walk into a room, don't assume that they've looked up. They probably didn't look up unless they are saying they looked up. And then a big thing here, which I've already known and I've already done, is if the characters need information, make sure there's a way to give them information. You don't want to hide important secrets or discoveries in places where the players aren't going to find them. So make sure they can't miss something important simply by failing an ability check, not talking to the right person, or not looking in the right place. A big thing here for me is if you plan for like an NPC to give them information, which I think is perfectly fine in my opinion, it doesn't really mention it in this book. If they don't talk to that NPC, have a backup plan. Just have another way that the character can obtain the information. Some people might call that railroading. I call that just keeping the campaign going. And then it does say you can give information to one player, but it's okay to let the rest of the players know what happened, assuming that that character is going to go back and tell them. It does remind you that you might need to remind the other players that they aren't present, so they cannot give input or help during a situation, which I think happens a lot. Sometimes you do want to give information to one player and it gives a couple of suggestions in the Dungeon Master's Guide for that. We are not just going to do a play-by-play of the Dungeon Master's Guide, but the two options they give is to pull the character aside, pull the player aside, or hand them a secret message on like a sticky note, or you can whisper it to them, you can text it to them. There's a couple of ways to convey information to just one person without the entire party hearing. So that is what this book has to say about narration. I think those are solid points. I'm going to double check to make sure that there's nothing else that we would need to look at in here. So we did that. We don't need role playing. Okay. I don't think there's anything else here. So I do think those are good points though. And I do like the 5.5 DMG, or you might call it the 2024 DMG. They changed it to 5.5 recently if you're not in the loop there. So it is not just 2024's 5th edition, which is what it was called for a minute. Now, I want to put a little bit of this in practice. So I have typed something on my phone. I typed this a minute ago. I've been walking behind the scenes on getting some information for this video. Like I said, I watched some videos. In the future, I will include the videos that I watched. This video that I'm currently recording took me a lot longer to do than I expected to. I thought I was going to do this so long ago. I mean, like 3 weeks ago. So that is my bad. If you are in my actual play campaign, which I know is on hiatus, stop watching this video. This is going to be the intro for session 3. So if you're watching this, just stop watching the video. This will spoil some stuff. I'll leave names out a little bit, but this is just a monologue that I wrote. I think I should write more monologues as a DM. Let me know in the comments if you don't agree with that, because this is something that I don't do often. But I think there are points in a campaign where a monologue can make sense. So I have here, you hear your heart beating in your ears. Your vision is blurry and your clothes are damp with blood. Deep slashes tear across your torso, and you know that you're in intense pain, but you can't feel anything. In front of you is a dark silhouette of a man with a sword in each hand. He stands in front of a blinding red gash in the air. Screams and cries of anguish pour from this portal, begging for help, but you feel like your limbs are stone. You wake up in your assigned room at the Adventuring Guild. Your sheets are soaked in sweat and tears have streaked your cheeks. And then I would welcome everybody to the campaign, because that is a cold open for campaign 3, or for session 3 of my current campaign. So let me know if you did like that in the comments. I'm trying to do more monologues. I'm trying to be a little bit more descriptive. I want to talk about describing towns and stuff, but I do like the idea of not going into too much detail with it. So I have a town in my campaigns that is like a little bit influenced by fairies. So instead of the Feywild, I use fairy, like the name of the Feywild and like the Shakespeare plays, but it's influenced by fairy. So there's a lot of weird looking buildings there, but there's also a lot of technological advancements in this city. It's a city of gnomes and halflings and fae folk, so like Harengon and stuff like that. And I want that to be reflected in how eclectic the city is. So instead of them walking in and me describing individual buildings, which I could do if they go to the buildings like later, instead I want them to walk in and say, you enter this town with a very eclectic architectural style. The buildings seem to clash. Some are incredibly colorful, some are sleek and gray, some just look like cottages. And instead of diving really deeply into that, I want to dive in deeper in individual moments. So let's say they go to the tavern, I can describe how the tavern looks. Maybe it has like vines going through it, or like a magic beanstalk kind of vibe going through it. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with how a tavern looks, but I want to do that individually instead of describing trying to describe an entire city in one scene. Like, since Barry is from Shakespeare, I want to have the Globe Theater there, but they don't need to know that the Globe Theater is there. I want to maybe describe when they enter town, not only the eclectic buildings, but the very diverse population. It's like, yeah, halflings and gnomes and fae folk live there, but so do humans and elves and goblins and Goliaths. Like, this is kind of a melting pot city. And it's not because they're all from there. It's just that the people of this city are incredibly welcoming. And I think that making the population diverse can show how welcoming they are. I think I'm okay at describing NPCs sometimes, especially if they have something important about them, but I think a lot of NPCs might not have something important about them. So often I'll just describe like the race, whether like how big they are, the stature and everything. But some NPCs, I might go into more detail with. I have some weird looking NPCs in some of my games. Let me know if you guys have any more advice for being descriptive in sessions, what you guys have done in the past, what you have seen done in the past that's really good. I said at the beginning of this video that I think my issue is that I have gotten a lot of this from actual plays, but at the same time, I want to do actual plays. So if I want to do actual plays, should I take that advice from them? Or do you think there's value in trying to be a more grounded, like home DM on YouTube? So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video. We're going to be doing this for a while, but I'll probably do one of these a month and then a different D&D centered video each month. So other than that, guys, I hope everybody is having an amazing day. And until next time, guys, peace.